Let me introduce myself. Hello. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. Well, I don't know if you've seen The Princess Bride, but there's a character there called Inigo Montoya, and he is set on revenge. He is searching for the man with 6 fingers on his right hand, and that is how he will identify his father's killer. And his one goal in life is to kill the one who killed his father. It's one of the things that makes The Princess Bride such a great film to watch, because we love a revenge story, don't we? Whether it's The Princess Bride or The Count of Monte Cristo or Hamlet or Zorro, we love to get behind a character who is set on revenge because we have a sense of justice. And we don't think that injustice should go unchecked. Perhaps you feel this in your own life. Perhaps you have been treated badly, or someone you love has been treated badly, and your sense of justice wants to see that put right. The problem is, as we read through the Bible, that the greatest wrong that has been done is not the wrong that we have been wronged with, the wrong that people have wronged us with. When we come face to face with God in the Bible, we discover that the greatest wrong is not what others have done to us, but the greatest wrong in our lives is the wrong that we have done to God. We have been given our very lives by God so that we could know and honour and worship Him. And yet we've used those lives and we've robbed worship from God, and we've generally stolen it for ourselves, wanting to put ourselves at the centre and not God. And yet God, in His mercy, calls a people to Himself. That's what He did in the Old Testament with the people of Israel. He gave them a land they didn't deserve. If you look at the map on your handout there, you'll see what's been happening in the previous sort of 7 chapters to what we've just read. That land that is a gift to them, that they were going to live in houses they didn't build and reap the crops from vineyards they didn't plant. It was given to them as a gift, mapped out in the previous 7 chapters. But how were they going to live as sinful people in the presence of a holy God? Right in the center of that map, you'll see Jerusalem. That was where God was going to commission His temple to be built so that He could say He lives in the center amongst His people. But how could His people who've wronged Him live in the presence of a holy God? How can there be justice because He is a just God, but how can there also be mercy because we are an unjust people? And I think it's no coincidence that straight after the division of that land, there's this chapter in Joshua chapter 20 about the cities of refuge. Here we'll see what God will provide His people, not just His Old Testament people, but pictured in these cities, what He will provide for us, His new covenant people, so that we can be people who, though we deserve God's justice, can expect and delight in and hope in His provision of mercy. In this chapter we're going to see 4 things that God provides: a place of refuge, a process of justice, a priest who dies, and a people who trust. So firstly, in the first 5 verses, God provides a place of refuge. Have a look down again at Joshua chapter 20, the first verse. Let's hear what God is saying to us in His word this evening. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Tell the Israelites to designate the cities of refuge as I instructed you through Moses, so that anyone who kills a person accidentally and unintentionally may flee there and find protection from the avenger of blood. When he flees to one of these cities, he is to stand in the entrance of the city gate and state his case before the elders of that city. Then they are to admit him into their city and give him a place to live with them. If the avenger of blood pursues him, they must not surrender the one accused, because he killed his neighbour unintentionally and without malice aforethought." What's going on then with these cities is first of all the gift of time. Someone kills someone else, they can run. If you look at the map, you'll see that they are distributed across the land. Each of those stars is a city of refuge, 3 on the west, 3 on the east. And it means that they won't have to run too far. It's a long day's travel is as long as any of them will have to travel. They can get there quick. That they could get there without even having to eat a meal if they kept walking. And then they would be let into the city. I wonder if you had the same question that I did when you're reading through this text. That in verse 4, when he flees to one of these cities, he's to stand at the entrance to the city gate and state his case before the elders of that city. Then they are to admit him into their city and give him a place to live with them. But what if he's lying? I mean, anyone who kills someone, they know this is a provision in God's land. They're going to run and claim to be someone who's killed someone accidentally, aren't they? And they are to hear his case, but they're not actually to weigh his case at that time. He's not immediately to face trial. No, that's going to happen in verse 6. There's going to be a trial that comes later, after the avenger of blood has come, and there's time for all the witnesses to be called from his hometown to make that day's journey to get to the city of refuge so that there could be a fair trial. But first of all, there's time given, an assumption of innocence until he's proved guilty. Time gives clarity, doesn't it? To ensure that a response isn't hot-headed. Often when we're crying out for justice, we need time to see things clearly. We should take time ourselves before we vent our justice. It's so easy, isn't it, in today's age of immediate direct message communication, to send that angry text or email or however you communicate with people, TikTok message or whatever it is, to send it immediately. But time gives clarity to our sense of justice. It gives us the possibility that we've got things out of proportion, haven't seen things truly, but are responding with a warped sense of justice. Our sense of justice is given to us by God. He is a just God. But anyone who has either been a sibling or been the parent of more than one child knows that though every child has a sense of justice, it's not entirely unbiased. How many children have you heard say this? "Mum, Dad, you're being so unfair. You are treating me so much better than my sibling." You don't hear that so often, do you? "You're treating my sibling so much better than me." As a parent of 6, I've heard that quite a bit. Very rare, not completely absent, but very rare is the time when the child says, "You're treating me better." And usually that's because they've been told that 20 times by their sibling already, that they have been treated unfairly. The thing is, we don't grow out of that warped sense of justice. we only get to live behind our own eyes. And so it's really difficult to see the world through other people's eyes, particularly if we think that they've wronged us. We may not be quite so quick to see maybe we've wronged them too. This was the case with the Avenger of Blood. The Avenger of Blood would probably be a senior person in the wider family of the person who was killed. And it's a good thing that there was an Avenger of Blood, that someone would speak up for the person who can no longer speak because they've been killed. We read this kind of language from the very beginning of the Bible. As soon as there is murder in Genesis chapter 4, as Cain kills his brother Abel, we read that the Lord says to Cain, "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Your brother's blood itself is crying out for vengeance, for a righting of that wrong. God himself comes in judgment in the flood. And then after the flood, he tells Noah that those who spill blood, their blood ought to be spilt. There ought to be justice. But we don't want to assume just because we have a sense of justice that our justice is right. No, take time. And these cities of refuge gave time so that by the time there was a trial, there might have been a better chance of all sides being heard. And it being discerned whether that killer's claim that he killed accidentally was in fact true or just a front. But during that time, imagine something else that has been given. So there's also as well as the gift of time, there's the extraordinary gift of hospitality. Imagine what it was like to live in one of these towns. These were one of the Levite towns. And you'll notice as you have the map drawn out there that there is no area given to the Levites. The Levites were to live in every other tribe, and they weren't given much land like the other tribes were. Why? Because we read earlier in earlier chapters that the Lord himself was their inheritance. If you look at the map and you ask the question, which tribe gets the biggest inheritance? You might think, well, Judah has a pretty big inheritance. Oh no, Manasseh's is even bigger up the top. No, but the biggest inheritance is the Levites. The biggest inheritance can't be seen on a map because the Lord himself is their inheritance. And they were to represent the Lord's justice and his mercy to the people as they lived among them in various towns. And these City of Mercy were one of the great places that they could demonstrate the character of God. What amazing hospitality! That their towns would be filled with killers, given time, awaiting their trial. And if they were found that in that trial that they hadn't killed on purpose, it had been an accident, they would live there at least until the death of the high priest, maybe decades. And those cities would be a place of refuge. Hope Church, that is what you are to be in Hazelmere. You know, there'll be people living in this town and the surrounding towns who assume that they will never set foot inside these doors because that's the place where they're going to be judged. Well, I hope that as people encounter you, maybe not inside these doors because they wouldn't darken them, but as you go out into this community and they meet you, discover you're a Christian and assume you're going to judge them, that instead they will find you to be the most merciful person they've met. With the most open arms. Not because you don't think they're a sinner, because you know you are too. And you can hold out to them the message of the mercy of God. The God of justice who will come in vengeance one day, but has waited 2,000 years already since people murdered his son. Why? Because he wants to show his mercy and extend his mercy to generation after generation after generation before the day of reckoning. This doesn't mean that we are to be protecting people from the law. No, we are not like the Old Testament. The people of God is not the same as the state, and the state has a role to play. One of the things we might want to do is help people go down to the police station and own up to something they've done, and to stand at their side and help them through that process. But we, in a cynical society, don't want to assume that we know what's gone on in people's hearts. Don't want to assume that we can blame them for the brokenness in their lives. Particularly those of us who are British. There's something in our culture that can be very quick to talk about bad things in other people's lives and never have a kind and honest conversation with them about it. We're not to be like that, are we? Why not? Because we've experienced the mercy of God in Jesus Christ. We have fled to refuge, to Christ himself. And we came to hear that message by others who shared that message of mercy with us. We are to be those who let people into our lives as we share the gospel with them, without too many questions, without trying to find out exactly whether it's safe or not. Now, it's good to have safeguarding policies in your church. I'm not speaking against that. But we can't protect ourselves from the messiness of people's lives. But we can offer open arms of welcome to all. A place of refuge. But as well as a place of refuge, there is to be a process of justice. Verse 6, he is to stay in that city until he has stood trial before the assembly. At that assembly, two sides will be heard. The avenger of blood and any witnesses that they could gather for that trial. The avenger of blood could not function as the prosecution or the judge and jury. In the ancient Near East, this was quite remarkable. There are other Near Eastern cultures today where still the act of honor killing takes place. That it's the family's responsibility not just to appeal for justice, but to carry it out. That was the norm in the ancient Near East. But Israel had a God who was just, and also was aware that not one of us is just like our God. And so there was to be a process where both sides would be heard.